Welcome to History Hits Soft, where the past speaks in whispers, and time flows as gently as a dream. Tonight, we're traveling far, not through space, but through memory. Through civilizations lost to time, monuments weathered by sand, and voices etched in stone. There's no need to stay awake, no need to take notes. Just listen, let your thoughts drift, and let the stories of the ancient world lull you into rest. From the flowing Nile to the Pyramids of Giza, from marble columns to golden tombs, you'll wander through wonder at the quiet edge of sleep. So settle in, dim the lights, and let's begin our journey through the calm corners of history. For thousands of years, the Grand Pyramids stood as silent sentinels over the Egyptian sands, massive, ancient, and enigmatic. Much of ancient Egypt's story remained locked away in mystery until a discovery in 1799 changed everything. During Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign in Egypt, a French soldier stumbled upon a large stone slab near Rosetta, not far from Alexandria. What he found was more than just stone. It held the key to decoding a language long lost to time. This artifact would later be known as the Rosetta Stone, and it would help unlock the secrets of an entire civilization. The Greek historian Herodotus once called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and for good reason. The Nile River was Egypt's lifeblood, bringing seasonal floods that fertilized the land and allowed agriculture to flourish. Over millennia, the muddy floodplains created ideal conditions for early human communities to grow into complex societies. As early as the Miocene era, the Nile had begun shaping the landscape into a fertile valley. The yearly flooding deposited rich silt across the land, and as the waters receded, people would begin planting crops, marking the start of Egypt's agricultural calendar. This rhythm of life made ancient Egypt one of the earliest farming civilizations in the world. By the end of the Paleolithic era, early Egyptians were crafting tools like harpoons, bone implements, and pottery. Archaeological evidence, including carbon-dated corn remains found in Neolithic silos, suggests that settled farming communities were active as far back as 4600 BCE. Eventually, these communities constructed homes from reeds and mud, sowing crops in the moist soil near the river's edge. Over time, this gave rise to larger and more organized settlements. Ancient Egypt was divided into two primary regions: Upper Egypt in the south, stretching toward Aswan, and Lower Egypt in the north, encompassing the Nile Delta. Around 3100 BCE, King Narmer unified these two lands. Though they became one kingdom, each region kept its own symbolic crown: the white hejit for Upper Egypt and the red deshret for Lower Egypt. The pharaohs would wear a combined crown called the pshent, symbolizing their rule over both lands. The period before written history in Egypt, known as the pre-dynastic era, spans from roughly 6000 to 3150 BCE. Though no writing survives from this time, archaeological digs have revealed a rich cultural past through tools, pottery, and early structures along the Nile. Cultures of this era are named after the regions where artifacts were found, like the Badarian or Naqada cultures. The Assyrian and Hafan peoples, who lived between Egypt and Nubia, also laid the groundwork for the civilization that would soon rise to greatness. Around 10,000 BCE, cultures like the Akhenaten, Sabellian, and Pharaohs emerged along the Nile's fertile fringes. These were primarily hunter-gatherer societies, but over time, they began to shift toward a more settled lifestyle. As agriculture took root, people started forming permanent communities, laying the groundwork for civilization. One remarkable early settlement was in the Fayum Oasis, a natural basin southeast of the modern-day Giza Plateau. Between 9000 and 6000 BC, a culture flourished here, living alongside a vast lake that sustained fishing, farming, and hunting. These early Egyptians built reed huts, many with underground storage pits to preserve food, a sign of growing stability and planning. They raised domesticated animals like sheep, goats, and cattle, and their society developed key technologies, including basket weaving and pottery. Leadership within these communities was typically handled by tribal chieftains, and power may have begun to pass through family lines, planting the seeds for hereditary rule. As these communities expanded, small mobile tribes gave way to larger, more permanent populations made up of multiple groups, living in shared regions year-round. One such culture to emerge from the Fayum society was the Merimd culture, dating between 5000 and 4000 BCE. It was named after discoveries found on the western edge of the Nile Delta and represents one of the key Neolithic cultures that helped define early Egyptian society. Agriculture remained the backbone of daily life. The earliest Egyptian farmers, once nomadic hunter-gatherers, now relied on predictable patterns of the Nile's annual flooding. They planted wheat, barley, lentils, flax, and peas, and managed herds of animals that contributed to a self-sustaining economy. Sites like Mindi Beni Salama provide crucial archaeological evidence of this transition, showcasing Neolithic layers dating from as early as 8000 BCE. Alongside Fayum, this site reveals how floodplains shaped Egyptian society. The natural geography of the Nile created shallow depressions, or basins, that were ideal for irrigation. These would fill with floodwaters each year, leaving behind rich silt. Archaeologists have identified over 130 ancient irrigation basins used to collect and redirect water for agriculture, acting as early reservoirs. To store food, Egyptians used clay jars and woven baskets, often buried partially underground, to keep contents cool and protected. By 4000 BCE, the El Omari culture had built upon these early innovations, constructing round houses with more advanced architecture, including mud-plastered walls, a step toward the organized cities of dynastic Egypt. While Upper Egypt developed later, it was in Lower Egypt, near the Mediterranean coast, that many of the earliest Egyptian cultures took root. These early societies flourished in the fertile delta, where the Nile meets the sea. Among the first settled communities was the Badarian culture, whose people initially lived in mobile tents, much like their nomadic ancestors. Over time, however, they began to favor permanent homes. This shift marked a major transition towards settled village life. Following the Badarians came the Amratian period, also known as Naqada I. This era brought about more advanced housing structures built with wattle and daub walls, featuring windows, hearths, and protective windbreaks around entryways. Homes were becoming more than just shelters. They were designed with function and comfort in mind. Around 3500 BCE, a profound cultural development emerged, the early practice of mummification. Although still in its primitive stages, the dead were carefully buried with personal belongings, reflecting beliefs in an afterlife and the importance of honoring the deceased. The next cultural phase, known as the Gurzian culture, brought even more sophistication. This period marked the beginning of long-distance trade with other regions, which inspired significant changes in Egyptian art, tools, and architecture. Homes during this era were increasingly made of sun-dried brick, and wealthier families began incorporating courtyards, a feature that would become standard in Egyptian domestic life for centuries. One of the most important sacred sites to emerge during this time was the city of Abydos, just north of Naqada. It developed into a sprawling necropolis, a city of the dead. What began as modest mud brick tombs soon evolved into more elaborate constructions made from carefully cut limestone blocks. Over time, Abydos would become the official burial ground for Egypt's earliest kings, though people from across the country also brought their loved ones here to be buried and remembered. Meanwhile, cities such as Zwa and Hierapolis were already considered ancient by this point, while other settlements like this, Naqada, and Naqain were rapidly growing into powerful urban centers. Around 340-03-200 BCE, another transformative breakthrough occurred, the development of the Egyptian hieroglyphic system. These intricate symbols allowed Egyptians to record transactions, events, and stories, ushering in a new era of organized administration and cultural continuity. Although full Egyptian sentences wouldn't appear until centuries later, some of the earliest examples of writing were uncovered at Abydos, one of Egypt's oldest sacred sites. These inscriptions etched on pottery shards, clay seals, and small objects made from bone and ivory date back to Naqada III, around 3200 to 3150 BCE. It wasn't until the reign of King Peribsen, roughly 500 years later during the Second Dynasty, that full sentences began to emerge in writing. But even without complex text, the symbols and records from Naqada III helped lay the foundations for Egypt's first recorded history. As trade increased and farming advanced, both Upper and Lower Egypt experienced population booms. Small villages built from sun-dried bricks gradually grew into more organized urban centers. But as these cities expanded, competition for trade routes and resources, especially water, soon turned peaceful neighbors into rivals. In Upper Egypt, three major city-states rose to prominence: Thinis, Naqada, and Naqan. Thinis ultimately emerged as the most powerful, defeating Naqada and later absorbing Naqain. These conflicts were waged by powerful rulers, including the mysterious Scorpion kings, and likely Ka and Narmer, two prominent figures of the proto-dynastic period. Many scholars believe that Scorpion I, Scorpion II, and King Ka were among the last rulers of this early era before Narmer, also known as Menes, rose to power. Around 3150 BCE, Narmer led a campaign that would unite Upper and Lower Egypt, establishing the first dynasty and marking the official start of Egypt's dynastic history. Narmer, believed to have hailed from Thinis or nearby Hierakonpolis, consolidated his rule by marrying Princess Nithotep of Naqada, forging a powerful alliance between regions. He launched military expeditions to suppress uprisings in Lower Egypt and expanded his control into neighboring lands like Canaan and Nubia. He also began ambitious building projects, which laid the foundation for Egypt's urban development. Narmer's son, Hor-Aha, took the throne around 3100 BCE, continuing his father's policies. A deeply spiritual ruler, Hor-Aha emphasized religion and burial practices, and during his reign, the first mastaba tombs, rectangular, flat-roofed burial structures, were constructed. Horeha's successor, Djir, assumed power around 3050 BCE. He upheld his father's legacy, continuing military campaigns and expanding the kingdom's territory. His son Jet, who ruled around 3000 BCE, married Princess Mernith, a powerful woman who, after his death, is believed to have either served as regent for their son Den or possibly ruled in her own right, making her the first recorded female leader in Egyptian history. Their son, Den, is widely regarded as the greatest ruler of the first dynasty. Reigning for about 50 years, Den brought stability, prosperity, and military success to Egypt. He was also the first pharaoh depicted wearing the double crown, symbolizing unified rule over both Upper and Lower Egypt. Ben was succeeded by Anigib and later Samarkand, both of whom faced internal unrest and short, turbulent reigns. The dynasty ended with Ka, whose death triggered a power struggle. Amid this chaos, a man named Hotesi Kimwi rose to power and founded the Second Dynasty around 2890 BCE. His name, meaning "the two powers are at peace," suggests that he may have unified rival factions after Ka's death. Interestingly, Hatshepsut Kimwi's name is inscribed at Ka's tomb, indicating that he likely buried the former king and assumed the throne peacefully. However, the Second Dynasty remains poorly documented. Many of its rulers' names overlap with earlier kings, and the historical record is riddled with inconsistencies. The period was marked by short reigns, conflict, and a general lack of clarity in royal succession. Still, even amid the uncertainty, this era laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. Instability and rebellion marked parts of Egypt's Second Dynasty. One notable ruler, Raneb, also known as Nebra, was the first pharaoh to officially associate his name with the gods, forging a new connection between kingship and divine authority. Later came Peribsen, a figure surrounded by mystery. Historians once speculated that he was the first monotheist, worshipping only the god Seth, but later evidence suggested otherwise. Peribsen's name is found exclusively in Upper Egypt, and while he did align with Seth, perhaps for political reasons to distinguish himself from the Horus line, Lower Egypt, his reign was far from iconoclastic. Under his rule, Egypt saw a flourishing of commerce, religious life, and the arts. Peribsen was succeeded by Khasekhemwy, likely his son, who continued many of his father's initiatives. Known for his impressive building projects, and a name that referenced both Horus and Seth, Khasekhemwy is credited with reconciling Upper and Lower Egypt after years of internal division. He laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most iconic periods in ancient Egyptian history. That legacy was carried into the Third Dynasty, starting with King Djoser, a ruler whose name would echo through the ages. Best known for commissioning the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, Djoser ushered in a golden age of architecture, religion, and state organization. While records from this period, like those of Sennacherib, another early Third Dynasty king, are scarce and sometimes confusing, Djoser's achievements are unmistakable. His reign likely lasted at least 2 decades, during which he launched military campaigns, stabilized Egypt, and initiated a massive surge in monumental construction. At the heart of his legacy is the Step Pyramid, designed by his brilliant architect and vizier Imhotep. More than just a builder, Imhotep was a polymath, a physician, astronomer, and sage, who would later be deified and worshipped as the god of medicine, both in Egypt and in Greece, where he was associated with Asclepius. Located in the necropolis at Saqqara, the Step Pyramid began as a traditional mastaba, a flat-roofed tomb, but evolved into a 6-tiered structure. Built from limestone blocks decorated with carvings of reeds and trees, it reached a height of 62 meters, making it the tallest structure in its time. To protect the pharaoh's remains and treasures, the actual burial chamber was placed far below the pyramid in a complex maze of underground tunnels and storage rooms. Despite these precautions, ancient tomb robbers managed to loot the site, leaving behind only a single foot, believed to be all that remained of Djoser himself. Still, the pyramid's construction marked a radical transformation. The stone engineering, symbolic design, and sheer scale established a blueprint for all pyramids to come. From the layer pyramid to the massive projects of the 4th dynasty, Djoser and Imhotep had set Egypt on a path of unprecedented architectural ambition. This ushered in what historians call the Old Kingdom, often referred to as the Age of the Pyramids. It was during this period, especially under the 4th dynasty, that pyramid building reached its zenith. Pharaoh Sneferu revolutionized the craft, experimenting with designs like the bent pyramid and red pyramid, perfecting techniques that would lead to the creation of the most iconic structures in human history, the Pyramids of Giza, constructed under the reigns of Khufu Khafre and Menkaure. Interestingly, the Old Kingdom left behind very few written records. Much of what we know comes not from scrolls or books, but from the monuments themselves, their statues, inscriptions, and surrounding temples. These stone records form the backbone of Egyptology, allowing scholars to piece together dynastic timelines and royal achievements. It wasn't until the 5th dynasty, during the reign of Unas, that the first known pyramid texts were inscribed. These religious writings, carved directly into the walls of the tomb, offer insight into Egyptian spiritual beliefs, afterlife rituals, and the evolving role of the pharaoh as both king and god. As Egypt entered the height of the Old Kingdom, the capital at Memphis became the political and cultural center of the unified nation. Here, art, architecture, and government were standardized, producing a unified visual identity that reflected royal authority. Sculptures, while rooted in older traditions, became increasingly refined, though still constrained by symbolic conventions. While literature and painting showed more experimentation, statues and royal imagery remained largely formal, reflecting a divine, idealized version of the human form. Of all the achievements from this period, none are more iconic than the Pyramids of Giza and the enigmatic Great Sphinx, lasting symbols of Egypt as power, wealth, and spirituality. Even the smaller structures of the time were built with precision and care, reflecting a deep reverence for the afterlife and the gods. Though all Egyptians shared the same basic religious beliefs, social divisions remained deeply entrenched, even in death. One crucial belief was that to enter the afterlife, a person had to be buried within Egypt. If someone died abroad, their family would go to extraordinary lengths to recover the body and return it to native soil, ensuring the proper rituals were performed. Burial outside Egypt meant spiritual exile. Building projects on the scale of the pyramids at Giza demanded an unprecedented level of organization. This level of efficiency was only possible through a highly structured bureaucracy, centered around the pharaoh, regarded not just as a ruler, but as a divine intermediary between the gods and the people. At the top stood the king, who, in theory, owned all of Egypt. Below him were the literate elite, a small but powerful class that recorded, managed, and shaped nearly everything we know about ancient Egyptian society. Interestingly, individuals often mattered more than their titles. Egypt as success depended less on rigid hierarchies and more on the competence of a few educated aristocrats. Without them, even the pharaoh's power would be difficult to exercise. To manage the complexities of statehood, the office of the vizier was created, effectively a prime minister. The vizier oversaw taxation, provincial governors, the army, large-scale construction projects, and public works. He served as the pharaoh's right hand and chief administrator. The final king of the third dynasty, Huni, was once believed to have begun Egypt's massive pyramid building era, but later research credits his successor Sneferu, founder of the fourth dynasty, for truly initiating the age of monumental stone construction. Sneferu, possibly Huni's son by a minor queen, became one of Egypt's greatest builders. His architectural ambitions began with the Medum Pyramid, now a collapsed tower of rubble, known as the False Pyramid. It was Egypt's first attempt at a true smooth-sided pyramid, but structural mistakes, placing the casing on unstable sand, led to its partial collapse. Undeterred, Sneferu moved on to Djoser, where he commissioned the bent pyramid. It began at a steep 55 incline, but halfway through, architects realized it was too steep and abruptly shifted the angle to 43, creating its now famous bent profile. Rather than abandon it, they completed the structure, an early example of Egypt's determination and adaptability. Learning from these errors, Sneferu then constructed the Red Pyramid, Egypt's first true smooth-sided pyramid. Named for the reddish hue of its limestone core, it rose on solid bedrock at a 43 angle and reached a height of 105 meters. Though originally clad in gleaming white limestone, much of that casing was later stripped by locals for other building projects. Still, the Red Pyramid remains a marvel of ancient engineering. Surrounding the pyramid were temples, storage buildings, and quarters for priests, who conducted rituals to honor the deceased king. Like Djoser before him, Sneferu established a model for royal mortuary complexes that would endure for centuries. His stable, prosperous reign laid the foundation for Egypt's golden age. Upon Sneferu's death, his son Khufu inherited the throne. He is most famous for commissioning the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest and most iconic pyramid in the world. Greek historians, especially Herodotus, painted Khufu as a cruel tyrant who forced his people into endless labor. These accounts, however, may have been colored by folklore and misunderstanding. One such tale comes from the Westcar Papyrus, a collection of stories likely written during the Middle Kingdom, but set in Khufu's court. In one account, the king demands a demonstration of magic involving a decapitated animal, an act some scholars interpret as harsh or callous. Despite his reputation, Khufu's reign was marked by wealth, stability, and innovation. Military campaigns expanded Egypt's borders into Nubia and Libya, while trade routes flourished, bringing in exotic goods and materials. Under Khufu, the power of the central state reached new heights. The immense scale of the Great Pyramid, built with over 2 million limestone blocks, reflects not just engineering prowess, but an advanced bureaucratic system capable of organizing labor, resources, and logistics on a scale unmatched by any other ancient civilization. King Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, ruled during Egypt as Fourth Dynasty and left behind one of history's most enduring monuments, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Located on the Giza Plateau near modern Cairo, this pyramid was built over a span of about 20 years and remains the only surviving structure among the ancient seven wonders of the world. While many theories have emerged about the pyramid's purpose, the most widely accepted is that it served as Khufu's tomb. Yet, how the massive structure was actually built remains a subject of debate. Traditional explanations suggest ramps were used to haul enormous limestone blocks into place, but no conclusive evidence has yet been found to confirm this. The intricate internal passageways, chambers, and shafts, along with the mysterious Osiris shaft, add to the ongoing fascination and speculation surrounding its construction. Despite these mysteries, it's clear that the Egyptians had technical skills and building methods so familiar to them that they left no records explaining the process. A key figure in this monumental project was Hamyunu Khufu's vizier and a relative who oversaw the pyramid's construction. Hamyunu was buried nearby, a testament to his importance in this grand undertaking. The labor force behind the pyramid consisted of both skilled artisans and unskilled workers, all organized by the state. These workers were either conscripted as part of a debt repayment, community service, or paid wages for their efforts. The annual flooding of the Nile, while vital for depositing rich soil on farmlands, made agricultural work impossible during inundation months. During these periods, the government directed labor towards state projects, such as building pyramids, temples, and monuments, ensuring the workforce remained employed. Following Khufu's death, his successor was Djoser, possibly his son but not his officially designated heir. Scholars debate whether Djoser or his brother Khafre built the Great Sphinx, the colossal statue with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh. Traditionally, the Sphinx's face is thought to represent Khafre, aligned precisely with his pyramid complex. However, some Egyptologists argue it may depict Khufu based on facial features. Khafre's pyramid is the second largest on the Giza Plateau, nearly as vast as his father's. Little is known about his reign, but historical texts suggest he maintained his father's policies, concentrating power within his family and exercising firm control over governance. After Khafre's death, succession became unstable again. Djoser's son Baka briefly ruled but died within a year. He was succeeded by Menkaure, Khafre's son, who is praised by both Egyptian and Greek sources. Menkaure began construction on his own smaller pyramid and complex at Giza, marking a significant shift in royal monument building. The reduced scale of Menkaure's pyramid reflected changing times. Resources that once supported the vast pyramids were no longer as abundant. Still, Menkaure endeavored to build a lasting royal tomb comparable to his predecessors. Unfortunately, his designated heir, Hatshepsut, died during the pyramid's construction, causing further disruption. Menkaure himself passed away before completing the complex, despite a reign of around 30 years. His successor finished the pyramid, but was buried in a modest mastaba at Saqqara, signaling a gradual decline in royal pyramid construction. As these monumental projects unfolded, temple and sanctuary control increasingly shifted to the hands of priests rather than the king. The Giza Plateau, now a desert landscape on Cairo's outskirts, was once a thriving city for the dead, populated by priests, workers, and craftsmen who maintained the royal mortuary complexes. Life in ancient Egypt was bustling and complex. The lowest social class, comprised peasant farmers who neither owned the land they cultivated nor the homes they lived in. These belonged to the monarchy, nobility, or priests. Each morning, peasants would declare, "Let us work for the nobility," a reminder of their role in sustaining society. Most peasants were farmers, tending to crops and livestock, giving a large portion of their yield to landowners, but keeping some for their families. Women often managed household gardens, while men labored in the fields. Besides agriculture, peasants produced goods essential for trade and daily life. They also formed the backbone of the labor force that built Egypt's monuments. During the Nile's annual flooding, when farming was impossible, peasants were employed in royal projects, moving stones, erecting obelisks, building temples and pyramids. Contrary to popular myth, there is no evidence these workers were slaves. Rather, they were compensated fairly for their labor. Skilled workers, painters, engravers, carpenters, and brewers were especially valued and often earned higher wages. Craftsmen produced pottery, furniture, and artwork that supported both everyday needs and elite lifestyles. Beer was a staple drink, brewed primarily by women in many cases, and was sometimes used as payment for workers. The goddess Tenenet was believed to oversee brewing. Marriage in ancient Egypt was generally a secular affair, arranged by families. Girls often married as young as 12, boys around 15. Royal children were frequently betrothed to foreign princes or princesses to cement political alliances. Despite their hard work, Egyptians also enjoyed leisure. They played sports such as hockey, handball, archery, and swimming, engaged in games like board games, and participated in group activities such as tug-of-war, gymnastics, and rowing. Among the many sports enjoyed by ancient Egyptians was a dramatic contest called water jousting. This event was a kind of naval duel played on small boats floating on the Nile River. Two jousters would attempt to knock one another off their vessel, while a teammate steered, the boat a thrilling spectacle that captivated the crowd. Festivals throughout Egypt were diverse and unique, depending on the occasion. But one constant was the joy of feasting and drinking. Egyptians' diet largely revolved around grains, like wheat and a variety of vegetables. Meat was considered a luxury, so only the wealthy, typically royalty, could afford it regularly. The fourth dynasty came to an end with the brief reign of Hatshepsut, and the fifth dynasty began under less auspicious circumstances. This era is often called the Sun King's dynasty, because many rulers adopted names containing the sun god Ra. The first three rulers of this dynasty, Userkaf, Sahir, and Neferkar, are celebrated in the famous Westcar papyrus, which tells tales of their divine selection as kings. Userkaf inaugurated the dynasty, but a prominent figure in this era was a woman named Khentkaus, likely a daughter of Menkaure from the fourth dynasty. She appears in texts as the mother of two kings who ruled over both Upper and Lower Egypt, though their exact identities remain uncertain. Khentkaus' significance is also marked by her monument, the fourth pyramid at Giza, attesting to her high status. Userkaf is most renowned for initiating the Temple of the Sun at Djoser, a major architectural shift signaling a change in royal ideology. This temple symbolized a growing devotion directly to the sun god Ra, mediated by a powerful priesthood, which consequently diminished the pharaoh's exclusive role as divine representative. His successor, Sahyar, built his mortuary complex near Userkaf's temple at Djoser and proved to be an effective ruler. He led Egypt's first documented expedition to the fabled land of Punt, securing valuable resources and establishing important trade connections. Punt gradually gained mythical status as a land favored by the gods. Sahir's temple is notable for its use of palm-shaped columns, a design innovation that later became common throughout Egypt. Sahir's military campaigns and prudent management strengthened the kingdom, as evident in the craftsmanship of his mortuary complex and the inscriptions left behind. Following Sahir, Neferkar Kakai ascended the throne. While inscriptions portray him as a respected king, little else is known about his reign, except that the priesthood's power continued to increase. His son, Neferfer, succeeded him but died young, around age 20. He was followed by Hatshepsut and then Nayuserni. The latter's rule saw the priesthood of Re grow even more influential, with temple bureaucracies expanding, imposing significant costs on the royal treasury to maintain the sanctuaries. Menkaure-Khayu succeeded Nizer, but left little trace beyond being the last king to erect a sun temple. After him, Djedkar-Isesi ruled during the late 25th to mid-24th century BCE. His origins are unclear, and he was not Menkaure's son, though possibly related. To stabilize the economy, Djedkar undertook extensive reforms of both administration and clergy. Notably, he abandoned the customary practice of building new sun shrines and reduced the number of priests required to care for mortuary complexes. He also organized a second expedition to Punt, which further enriched Egypt and solidified relations with that distant land. Djedkar's reign also marked the decentralization of government, empowering local officials more than ever before. He was succeeded by his son Unas, whose reign is sparsely documented. However, Unas holds the distinction of being the first Egyptian king to inscribe the interior of his tomb with the famous pyramid text's religious spells meant to aid his journey in the afterlife and portray his communion with gods Ea and Osiris. By the time the 6th dynasty began, the pharaoh's power was considerably diminished. Regional officials and bureaucrats began constructing more elaborate tombs than even some nobles. According to the 3rd century BCE historian Manetho, the last king of this dynasty, Teti, was assassinated by his own bodyguards, a shocking event unheard of in earlier times. Teti's successor, Userkar, may have been complicit in the assassination plot, but his reign was short-lived. He was followed by Pepi I, under whose rule provincial governors, known as nomarchs, gained increasing power. By the end of the Old Kingdom, political authority had fractured and decentralized. The long process of restoring central power would not begin until the Middle Kingdom. With the weakening of the pharaoh's control, local nomarchs assumed near total authority in their regions. This pattern continued through the reigns of Naringri-Nemkayem-Saf I and Pepi II, who ascended as a child and ruled for nearly a century. During Pepi II's lengthy reign, the Old Kingdom slowly crumbled as the influence of nomarchs and priests undermined royal authority. Pepi II was succeeded by Merenring, Nemkayem-Saf II, whose brief reign marked the dynasty's end. The final ruler may have been Nitocris, possibly the queen mentioned by Herodotus, who allegedly avenged her brother's murder by drowning his killers at a banquet. Pepi II outlived his heirs, and during his final years, proved ineffective, unable to respond to famine caused by drought. Without a strong central government, local rulers focused on their own territories, lacking resources or will to aid the nation. As the 6th dynasty faded, Egypt slipped into the first intermediate period, characterized by the rise of local administrators and decline of central authority in Memphis. During this era, the grand pyramids of the Old Kingdom ceased to be built. No strong sovereign existed to command and fund such vast projects, nor was there a centralized bureaucracy to organize labor on that scale. Rather than a chaotic collapse, evidence suggests the first intermediate period represented a different political and social order. Various regions governed themselves, while kings of the 7th and 8th dynasties held little real power and soon faded from memory. The ancient city of Memphis was abandoned by rulers who saw themselves as Old Kingdom heirs. Instead, Kings of the 9th and 10th dynasties established their capital at Heracleopolis, claiming to be Egypt's legitimate rulers. During this time, a powerful nomarch named Intef, titled Great Overlord of the Nome and Overseer of Priests, rose in Thebes around 2125 BC. He opposed the Heracleopolitan kings and founded the 11th dynasty, initiating efforts to reunify Egypt. Intef the Mighty was honored with a monument at the Temple of Karnak. Following Intef, Mentuhotep I expanded control over surrounding nomes and elevated Thebes' status. His successor, Mentuhotep II, completed the conquest of Heracleopolis and punished those loyal to the old regime while rewarding his supporters. After uniting Egypt, Mentuhotep II focused on governance, military campaigns, and construction projects ushering in the Middle Kingdom. His successor, Mentuhotep III, continued to strengthen the state, dispatching armies to Punt and fortifying northern borders. Mentuhotep IV ruled briefly and quietly, likely maintaining stability. Then came Amenhotep I, who became vizier under Mentuhotep IV and documented extraordinary signs suggesting divine favor. During a quarry mission for royal stone, he witnessed a gazelle giving birth on a chosen stone, and an unexpected rain shower watering a large festival gathering signs, interpreted as confirmation of his destined kingship. Amenhotep I abandoned Thebes for a new capital at Itchitoi, south of Memphis, marking the start of the 12th dynasty. His successor, Senusret I, further enhanced Egypt's prosperity and stability. Amenhotep I ushered in an era of grand building projects and infrastructure development, reminiscent of the Old Kingdom as impressive monuments, signaling the king's power and influence. Among his notable constructions was a temple dedicated to the god Amun at Karnak, which later became the foundation for the enormous temple complex there. Following in the footsteps of Intef I and Mentuhotep II, Amenhotep I curtailed the powers of local nomarchs and the priesthood, concentrating authority within trusted members of the royal family. His successor, Senusret I, continued this approach, creating a centralized administration that balanced strong royal control with the prosperity of Egypt's regions. Unlike the Old Kingdom, which saw regional leaders grow too powerful, the 12th dynasty maintained wealth at the center while encouraging local development. Egyptians perfected advanced irrigation techniques to manage the Nile's waters and optimize agriculture. They built nilometers, specialized structures to measure flood levels and determine tax rates accordingly. Canals were dug to channel water to farmlands across the country. When Senusret I decided to develop the Fayum region into a major agricultural hub, he engineered a sophisticated irrigation system, including a dike to divert water from Lake Moeris. This innovation brought remarkable crop yields to the area. Senusret I also commissioned the White Chapel, a small but historically valuable monument that lists all the nomes of his reign, an invaluable source for modern scholars. Amenhotep II, who ruled roughly from 1929 to 1895 BCE, may have governed jointly with Senusret I, reflecting the unique Middle Kingdom practice of co-regency. This system involved a reigning king sharing power with his designated heir, often his son, to ensure a smooth succession. Though debated by scholars, co-regency is well attested for Amenhotep II and his successor Senusret II, with overlapping reign dates appearing on official records. Senusret II's time saw continued prosperity and strong relationships with regional nomarchs. While local officials flourished, much like at the end of the Old Kingdom, their growing influence did not destabilize the kingdom as before. Senusret III was the dynasty's most powerful ruler, celebrated as a warrior king and deified during his lifetime. His reign was marked by military campaigns, expanding Egypt's southern borders into Nubia, as well as increased wealth and influence throughout the region. Senusret III constructed fortresses along Egypt's southern boundary to secure trade routes and facilitate commerce. He also launched expeditions into Palestine, strengthening trade links with the Levant. To control flooding and improve irrigation, Egyptians built earth and stone dams like the Elahan Dam, constructed during the reign of Amenhotep III, who followed Senusret III. This dam helped regulate floodwaters, protecting farmland from destructive inundation and conserving water for agriculture. As planting season approached in early November, farmers repaired irrigation systems, cleared canals, and checked property boundaries. Detailed agricultural processes are vividly depicted in tomb paintings, showing how ancient Egyptians cultivated crops such as emmer wheat grapes, dates, figs, sycamore, and papyrus, the latter used for making paper-like scrolls, sails, cords, and mats. Farmers employed various tools during planting, including the shaduf, a manual water-lifting device consisting of a long pole balanced on a pivot with a bucket on one end and a counterweight on the other. This simple but effective machine lifted water from the river to irrigate fields or fill containers for transport. One common question is how ancient Egyptians managed to move colossal statues and erect massive monuments without modern technology. Tomb scenes from officials like Chedu Nacht, a nomarch of the 15th Upper Egyptian nome during the 12th dynasty, provide clues. His tomb depicts a team of 172 workers transporting a nearly 7-meter-tall statue using ropes and sliding it along a lubricated ramp, illustrating the clever techniques used to ease movement of heavy objects. Amenhotep III, though lacking significant military achievements, rivaled his predecessors in monumental construction, notably commissioning the vast mortuary complex at Hawara, known as the Labyrinth. Amenhotep IV continued his father's policies, completing ongoing projects and initiating new ones. His reign saw frequent military and trade expeditions, expanding commerce especially with Levantine cities such as Byblos. While co-regency policies generally ensured smooth transitions, they failed after Amenhotep IV, who had no male heir prepared for succession. The throne passed to his sister or wife, Sobin Pharaoh, possibly the same as Queen Nitocris of the Old Kingdom, mentioned by Herodotus. If so, she was Egypt's first female ruler since the early dynastic period. Sobin Pharaoh's death without an heir ended the 12th dynasty and ushered in the 13th dynasty. Though inheriting the wealth and policies of the 12th dynasty, the 13th dynasty kings lacked its strong personal authority. They maintained national unity, but struggled to wield the same centralized power. During this time, political factions began emerging in Lower Egypt. The 13th dynasty rulers moved the capital from Ichtoi to Thebes in Upper Egypt, weakening control over the northern regions. Amenhotep I had founded a small settlement called Heju around the start of the 12th dynasty, near the Nile Delta's northern edge. This settlement grew into an important commercial center with access to the Mediterranean, sea and overland routes to Sinai and Palestine. The 13th dynasty saw increased trade and immigration, including the arrival of Semitic peoples, later known as the Hyksos by the Egyptians. The exact origins of the Hyksos remain debated. They may have been refugees fleeing turmoil in Asia. Egyptians called them Asiatics, a general term for peoples east of Egypt stretching from the Levant to Mesopotamia. By the late 13th dynasty, Egypt had stopped funding its southern border fortifications in Nubia and ceased deploying soldiers there, signaling a decline in centralized military control. During the later part of the 13th dynasty, Egyptian troops stationed at southern forts were never recalled to Egypt. Instead, these soldiers gradually settled permanently in those frontier garrisons. Over time, their role shifted from military defenders to commercial intermediaries, facilitating trade between Egypt's city of Thebes and the rising kingdom of Kush. As the 13th dynasty increasingly neglected both its northern and southern borders, Kush emerged as a centralized power with its capital at Kerma. Some Egyptian border fortifications were damaged or destroyed, possibly during conflict, though exact details remain uncertain. What is clear is that as Egypt's government and Thebes overlooked Kush's growing influence, Kush's power expanded and the southern border became less defined. The soldiers left behind no longer focused on defense, instead adapting to life as traders and local residents. In the later phases of the 13th and 16th dynasties, several rulers were of non-Egyptian origin or had foreign names, and these are generally identified as Hyksos monarchs. Their chronology is confusing. Some names are only recorded on ceremonial objects or fragmented king lists, making dating difficult. The Hyksos initially gained economic control over Egypt's eastern Nile delta. Gradually, they expanded northwards, negotiating treaties and alliances with various local governors throughout Lower Egypt. Once established at Avaris, they incorporated Egyptian customs and religious practices, even elevating Egyptians to important administrative positions. This dynasty of foreign rulers became known as Egypt's 15th dynasty. After they were eventually expelled, the victorious Theban rulers erased almost all traces of the Hyksos from Egyptian records. Thanks to archaeological finds at Avaris and elsewhere, only a handful of Hyksos rulers are known by name, most famously Api, whose Egyptian-style name alludes to the giant serpent Apep, the nemesis of the sun god Ra. While the Hyksos rose in the north, Nubian kingdoms were also gaining strength in the south. The Middle Kingdom's 13th dynasty, like Lower Egypt, had neglected its southern frontier. Thebes remained Upper Egypt's capital, but Egypt was effectively split between the Hyksos in the north and the Nubians in the south. According to the ancient historian Manetho, a Hyksos king named Ape wrote to the Theban ruler Sekenen Rai, demanding the removal of a hippopotamus pool east of the city because it disturbed his sleep. This likely referred to hippopotamus hunting, an activity sacred to Set, a deity worshipped by the Hyksos, for whom the hippopotamus was a religious symbol. Sekenen Rai did not comply and instead viewed the demand as a challenge to his authority. He launched an attack on Avaris, but was killed in battle, his mummy showing signs of violent death. Following this, his son Kamose took up the fight, lamenting in inscriptions the burden of paying tribute to the Asiatics and the Asiatics, and the pressure from hostile neighbors to the north and south. Kamose led a swift and devastating assault on the Hyksos-held territories, reportedly causing great terror and destruction, though the claim that Hyksos women were rendered barren and the city razed to the ground is likely exaggerated. The Hyksos retained control of Avaris for 3 years after Kamose's campaign. Kamose's brother, Amos-I, succeeded him and ultimately expelled the Hyksos, destroying their capital at Avaris. According to inscriptions from soldiers serving under Amos, the Hyksos fled first to Sharuan in Palestine, where they endured a prolonged siege of 6 years before retreating further to Syria. Their fate beyond this point remains unclear. Ahmose I founded the 18th dynasty and inaugurated the new kingdom, ushering in Egypt's imperial age. Recognizing how the Hyksos had established themselves by exploiting weaknesses in Egypt's borders, Ahmose fortified frontier regions and strategic sites to prevent future invasions. His military campaigns extended beyond Egypt's borders into Palestine and Syria, while he also secured the southern territories by confronting Nubian forces. Upon his death, Ahmose left a stable and prosperous kingdom for his successor Amenhotep I. Amenhotep I continued his father's policies, emulating Ahmose as a warrior king. Although there are no detailed records of his campaigns beyond Nubia, it's assumed that he maintained Egypt's control over its southern and northern frontiers. Thutmose I succeeded Amenhotep and quickly moved to expand Egypt's reach. He quelled a Nubian revolt, famously executing the Nubian king and displaying his corpse as a warning to others. He then pushed Egypt's borders further south before turning his attention to campaigns in Palestine and Syria. Thutmose I also undertook extensive building projects, including enlarging the famous Karnak temple and constructing numerous other temples throughout Egypt. Thutmose II followed, but his reign is less documented and overshadowed by his powerful half-sister and successor, Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was among Egypt's most effective new kingdom rulers. Initially serving as regent for Thutmose III, she soon ruled in her own right, commissioning major construction projects, including her renowned mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. She led Egypt's most successful expedition to the fabled land of Punt, expanded the Karnak temple, and maintained peaceful relations with Nubia. Many of the obelisks erected during this period symbolized the sun god Ra. Some original Egyptian obelisks survive worldwide, while many modern obelisks imitate their design. The process of carving these monolithic structures is evidenced by unfinished examples found in granite quarries at Aswan. Hatshepsut commissioned obelisks, likely intended to accompany the Lateran obelisk, originally from Karnak. The Lateran obelisk, originally erected in Egypt, was eventually transported to the Lateran Palace in Rome, where it still stands today. In 1458 BCE, Thutmose III inherited a wealthy and stable Egypt, and wasted no time in strengthening and expanding it. He established the Egyptian empire that his successors would maintain. Using war chariots acquired from the Hyksos, alongside superior bronze weaponry and innovative military strategies, Thutmose III led over 20 years of campaigns. He conducted at least 17 separate military expeditions, conquering lands from Libya in the west to Syria in the northeast, and extending Egypt's influence deep into Nubia in the south. When Hatshepsut died, Thutmose III ascended the throne. Seen as inexperienced and weak, the king of Kadesh in Syria led a revolt in the Egyptian-controlled province of Canaan. This rebellion quickly gained support from several other cities, aiming to overthrow Egyptian rule. The opposing forces gathered at Megiddo, where Thutmose III swiftly marched his army. Instead of taking the wide, easier routes, he chose a narrow path through the town of Aruna, surprising the rebels by entering the Kina Valley behind their defenses and defeating them decisively. The campaign was chronicled by Geneni, Thutmose III's commander and military scribe, whose detailed account was so impressive that the pharaoh ordered parts of it inscribed on the walls of the great temple of Amun at Karnak, and to a lesser extent at other sites. Geneni's writings describe the motivations for the campaign and the brutal suppression of the wretched adversary, the king of Kadesh and his allies. Following the victory at Megiddo, Thutmose III punished the rebels severely, capturing not only Kadesh, but also all of Syria and the Mitanni territories in Mesopotamia. His son, Amenhotep II, inherited a powerful and secure kingdom. Unlike his father, he was not a warrior king, but focused on large construction projects and diplomatic relations, signing peace treaties and trade agreements with neighboring states such as Mitanni. Thutmose IV, Amenhotep II's successor, is best known for the Dream Stele, which recounts how he ascended to the throne. Though considered a usurper by some, he was Amenhotep II's legitimate son and is famous for restoring the Great Pyramid of Giza. Following him, Amenhotep III ruled during Egypt's golden age of wealth, art, and political power. His reign was one of the most opulent in Egyptian history, and he used his riches to influence other nations diplomatically. He maintained stability, expanded Egypt's borders, and sponsored vast building programs, many of which survive today. However, during Amenhotep III's reign, the priests of Amun grew incredibly wealthy, surpassing even the pharaoh in landholdings and influence. Attempting to curb their power, Amenhotep III promoted the minor sun deity Aten, believing that royal authority backing Aten's worship would undermine Amun's priesthood. Though the plan failed, Aten's prominence rose and played a crucial role in the reign of Amenhotep III's son. Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten, dramatically transformed Egypt's religion and politics. Early in his reign, he changed his name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten and established Aten the sun disk as the sole god, effectively instituting Egypt's first known monotheistic religion. Akhenaten closed all temples to other gods, including the Grand Temple of Amun at Karnak, and built a shrine to Aten there. His wife, the famous Nefertiti, is remembered for her exquisite bust sculpted by the artist Thutmose. After Akhenaten's death, his young son Tutankhamun ascended the throne at about 9 years old, quickly renouncing his father's reforms. Tutankhamun restored traditional polytheistic worship, reopened temples, and moved the capital back to Thebes. Despite his brief reign dying at about age 18, Tutankhamun is best known today for his richly furnished tomb, discovered nearly intact by Howard Carter in 1922. Tutankhamun was married to Akhenaten, his half-sister. Following his death, Akhenaten may have briefly attempted to rule or married the powerful Vizier I, who succeeded Tutankhamun around 1324 to 1320 BC. Horemheb then took the throne, restoring Egypt's traditional religion and customs after the Amarna period's upheaval. He sought to erase the memory of Akhenaten's reign, destroying his statues and writings, and demolishing his sanctuary at Karnak. Though Horemheb revitalized Egypt's culture and religious institutions, he struggled to restore the kingdom to the heights achieved under Amenhotep III. When Horemheb died without an heir, his vizier Ramses I seized power, founding the 19th dynasty. An elderly man at his accession, Ramses I focused on rebuilding temples and sanctuaries, especially the vast complex at Karnak. He also empowered his son Seti I to lead military campaigns to recover territories lost during the Amarna period. Seti I continued Egypt's revival, enhancing construction projects at Karnak and grooming his son, Ramses II, for leadership. Ramses II, Egypt's most famous pharaoh, ruled for 67 years. His reign is remembered for grand temples and monuments, celebrating his victories and achievements. many of which survive today. One of his most legendary deeds was the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE against the Hittites. Anatolia's Hittite kingdom had grown powerful since the second millennium BCE and increasingly challenged Egyptian interests. Early attempts to engage diplomatically with the Hittites were ignored, and conflict escalated under Akhenaten and Horemheb. Seti I recovered key cities like Kadesh in Palestine, but neglected to fortify them adequately. Ramses II assembled a large army of about 20,000 soldiers, divided into 4 divisions, and marched swiftly to Kadesh. On the approach, 2 Bedouin scouts were captured and asked about the Hittite king Mu'attali II's location. They falsely claimed the Hittite army was far away and that Mu'attali feared Ramses II. However, the scouts were spies, and the Hittite forces, including 3,500 chariots and 37,000 troops, were waiting just beyond the next hill. Ramses II advanced too quickly, becoming separated from his other divisions. As Hittite chariots struck his camp, he sent urgent messages for reinforcements. The timely arrival of the 2nd Division prevented an Egyptian defeat, and Ramses personally led the remaining troops into battle. The Battle of Kadesh remains one of history's most famous ancient clashes, immortalized in Egyptian reliefs and inscriptions. Many times, the Egyptian forces pushed the Hittite soldiers back toward the Orontes River, where many perished. Mu'attali II, the Hittite king, had marched from the walls of Kadesh, intending to trap Ramses II's army between his forces by the river and his advancing troops. However, for reasons unknown, he chose to remain inside the city and never committed his reserve troops to battle. Ramses II declared a great triumph at Kadesh and commissioned a scribe to record a detailed account of the battle. Mu'attali I's own version of events differed significantly, most notably in claiming Kadesh as a Hittite victory. While Ramses II did not capture the city, he successfully broke the Hittite army in open combat. On the other hand, although Mu'attali retained control of Kadesh, he failed to annihilate the Egyptian forces as he had planned. Moving forward, Merneptah, Ramses II's 12th son, and not originally the heir, became pharaoh after all his older siblings died during their father's lengthy reign. Merneptah embraced his father's image as a warrior king, famously defeating the Libyans in battle and repelling an attack by the enigmatic Sea Peoples. His reign is marked by the Merneptah stele, the earliest known reference to the Israelites as a people. Advancing into the 20th dynasty, Ramses III emerged as the last powerful ruler of Egypt's new kingdom. After Horemheb restored the ancient religion, the priests of Amun had grown increasingly powerful, accumulating wealth and influence that began to rival the monarchy itself. Throughout the Ramesside period, the kingdom's condition gradually worsened. The threat posed by the Sea Peoples grew significant enough that Ramses III declared war against them. The origins of these Sea Peoples remain uncertain. Egyptian records only describe them in the context of battle. The inscription at Tanis famously states, "They came from the sea in their warships, and none could stand against them." These enigmatic invaders were feared for their ferocity. Ramses II, his son Merneptah, and Ramses III are the 3 great pharaohs whose reigns include the most extensive records of conflicts with the Sea Peoples. During Ramses III's rule, the Sea Peoples destroyed Egypt's commercial hub at Kadesh and attempted a renewed invasion. The initial assaults were swift coastal raids before the invaders pushed toward the Nile Delta. In 1180 BCE, Ramses III subdued them, but the Sea Peoples returned in greater force. Aware of their violence and the failures of previous open battles, Ramses III rejected a pitched fight. Instead, he adopted guerrilla tactics, setting ambushes along the coast and the Nile Delta. His archers, camouflaged on the beaches, rained down volleys of arrows on the invaders' ships at his command, setting many ablaze once their crews were killed or drowned. After crushing the naval invasion, Ramses III focused on the remaining land forces, using similar tactics. In 1178 BCE, the Sea peoples were decisively defeated off the coast of Zoan. Egyptian records celebrate a spectacular victory, describing many enemy casualties and the capture of others, who were either conscripted into Egypt's army and navy or sold as slaves. Though Ramses III spared Egypt from conquest, the campaign drained the royal treasury. This led to the first recorded labor strike in history at Deir el-Medina, where tomb workers refused to work until their wages were paid. After this period, the Egyptian empire's momentum began to decline. Ramses III retained strong central authority, secured Egypt's borders, and maintained prosperity, but the kingdom was crumbling. The office of pharaoh no longer held the reverence it once did, as the priests of Amun increasingly acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people. Ramses III was eventually injured in an assassination attempt orchestrated by one of his lesser wives and died from his wounds. His successor, Ramses IV, ascended the throne after his elder siblings had died. He sought to emulate Egypt's great pharaohs, completing several construction projects and fighting to maintain Egypt's shrinking empire. However, his reign was brief. Ramses V continued the struggle to control the influence of Amun as his priests and keep the kingdom intact, followed by Ramses VI, about whom little is known. The following rulers, Ramses VII, VIII, IX, X, and she all faced similar challenges, attempting to preserve the kingdom amid increasing external threats and internal conflicts with the priesthood. One notable episode involved Amenhotep, high priest of Amun, who was deposed by the vizier Penisi and forced to flee south to Nubia. Despite such upheavals, the priests of Amun maintained vast power and even eventually took control of the throne. Around 1077 to 1051 BCE, Smendes ruled Lower Egypt from Tanis, interrupting Ramses XI's reign. Following Egyptian custom, Smendes asserted his legitimacy by relocating the capital from Ramses to Tanis. By this time, the priests of Thebes had also grown powerful, controlling Upper Egypt. Contrary to popular belief, the division between Tanis and Thebes did not spark open civil war. Rather, Smendes maintained authority over Lower Egypt, while the high priests of Thebes held sway over the south. This division marked the dominant political structure throughout the Third Intermediate Period, with local rulers gaining power at the expense of the central government. Both Tanis and Thebes governed their respective regions, but lacked national influence. The 22nd dynasty, founded by the Libyan ruler Shoshenkai, marked a revival of Egypt's power and stability. After unifying the country, Shoshenkai embarked on military campaigns reminiscent of Egypt's imperial past. He reformed the administration of Tanis and restructured the clergy of Thebes, transforming religious offices like the high priesthood and the influential role of the god's wife of Amen from hereditary positions into ones appointed directly by the monarch. These reforms strengthened royal control over the powerful priesthood. Shoshenq's military successes revitalized Egypt's economy and brought the nation close to the grandeur of the new kingdom. His successor, Osorkon II, managed to keep Egypt united during his reign. However, after his rule, the kingdom fractured into several distinct states ruled from different centers: Heracleopolis, Tanis, Sais, Memphis, and Hermopolis in Lower Egypt, and Thebes in Upper Egypt. To the south, the Nubian Kushite ruler Kashta seized on Egypt's weakness. A devout admirer of Egyptian culture, Kashta Egyptianized his capital at Napata, and his territory maintained strong trade ties with Thebes and mastered Egyptian religious and political customs, including priestly appointments. Kashta's son Pi consolidated Nubian dominance over Upper Egypt. When Lower Egyptian kings resisted, Pi led a large army into their territory, conquering key cities and effectively bringing all of Egypt under his rule. Yet, he allowed local rulers to regroup and maintain some power as buffer zones, a practice that diminished over the Third Intermediate Period, leading to Egypt's loss of strength. Neighboring kingdoms, such as Judah and Israel, filled some of these buffer roles. Pi's conquests pushed Egypt's boundaries close to the Assyrian Empire, eliminating the previous buffer states. Moving to the 26th dynasty, Sontik I was a powerful ruler who sought to restore Egypt as former glory through grand building projects, restorations, and military campaigns. His son, Necho II, continued this legacy by expanding the military and commissioning extensive construction efforts. Recognizing Egypt's lack of a strong naval tradition, Necho II employed Greek mercenaries to build a formidable fleet, strengthening Egypt's military capabilities. He is remembered as a great warrior and a capable military commander who fortified the nation. During the reign of Ramses II, the government underwent reforms to improve spending and stimulate the economy. Under his leadership, Egypt thrived again, with secure borders, prosperous trade, and completed monumental building projects. Egypt's reputation regained much of its former luster. Ramses II's son, Psamtik III, inherited the throne at a young age and faced considerable challenges. When the Persian king Cambyses II sought to marry into the Egyptian royal family, Ramses II had refused, sending a substitute bride instead. This insult enraged Cambyses II, who vowed revenge. Under Persian rule, starting in 525 BCE with Cambyses II, Egypt became part of the vast Achaemenid Empire. Cambyses II's successor, Darius I, governed Egypt with relative respect for its culture and religion. He visited Egypt twice and funded temple reconstructions and new dedications. His policy of religious tolerance ensured the Egyptian gods were honored with gifts and statues. Darius's son, Xerxes I, relied on Egyptian resources during his failed Second Persian invasion of Greece. After military defeats, Xerxes focused on construction and court affairs rather than foreign campaigns. Xerxes was succeeded by Artaxerxes I, who fought a 6-year rebellion led by the Libyan prince Inaros II, supported by Athens. Despite Persian control, Egyptian culture thrived. Egypt's late period saw a complex relationship with Persian rule, including brief Egyptian independence during the 30th dynasty, led by pharaohs like Nectanebo I and II. These rulers commanded armies and undertook construction projects in the style of the great pharaohs, offering a last flourish of native Egyptian sovereignty before Persia reconquered the land. Around this time, Philip II of Macedon united the Greek city-states under Macedonian rule and prepared to conquer Persia. After his assassination, his son Alexander the Great inherited his plans and resources, soon to embark on his famous campaigns. The pharaohs of the 30th dynasty upheld Egyptian kingship's honor, leaving impressive architectural legacies. Although the late period marked the end of Egyptian sovereignty, it was far from the end of Egyptian civilization. Today, modern Egypt still carries the legacy of its ancient past. The Nile River remains sacred, and traditional festivals like the spring celebrations continue. Egyptian cuisine draws inspiration from ancient recipes, and the Coptic language, the last development of ancient Egyptian, survives in church liturgies, and influences Arabic dialects spoken locally. Egyptians today proudly honor their heritage, as seen in the grand parades in Cairo for transporting royal mummies to the new National Museum and the reopening of the Avenue of the Sphinx at Luxor. Modern infrastructure projects carve highways through deserts and mountains to improve commerce. And Egypt is close to opening what will be one of the world's largest museums. Archaeological excavations reveal new discoveries daily, holding the promise of a find as momentous as Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. This land will always captivate the world with its enduring magic, mystery, and history.